Goldie Hawn spent 40 years inside one of Hollywood's most famous love stories. But at 80, she finally said the words out loud. There were whispers about a first marriage that dragged on for 3 years, rumors of a second husband whose accusations turned ugly, and a quiet decision she made with her own children that nobody saw coming. What really happened the night Kurt joked about marriage on the Oscars stage? And why did a woman who had everything a marriage could give still refuse to walk down the aisle? The real story goes deeper than anyone expected. Goldie Hawn was born on November 21, 1945, in Washington, D.C., and from the very beginning, her life was shaped by performance. This was not something she discovered later. It was already around her at home. Her mother, Laura Hawn, owned a dance school, and her father, Rut Hawn, was a professional band musician. So music, rhythm, and movement were part of daily life long before fame ever entered the picture. Her background was layered too. Her mother came from Hungarian Jewish immigrant roots, while her father was Presbyterian with German and English ancestry. Goldie was raised Jewish in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and that mix gave her a world that already felt a little broader than the one many children around her knew. That early world mattered because it pushed her toward the stage almost as soon as she could walk. She started ballet and tap at just 3 years old, and this was not the kind of childhood hobby that stayed small for long. She moved fast, very fast. By 1955, when she was only 10, she was already dancing in the corps de ballet of the Ballet Russes de Monte Carlo production of The Nutcracker. That detail says everything. While most children were still figuring out school performances and little recitals, Goldie was already inside a serious professional setting. She was learning discipline early. She was learning timing early. And without fully knowing it yet, she was building the kind of stage confidence that would later make her look effortless in front of millions. As she grew older, that confidence only became stronger. By the time she was 18, she was already reaching beyond local dance spaces and school events. In 1964, she made her stage debut as Juliet in a Virginia Shakespeare Festival production of Romeo and Juliet. And that was not a small role to ease into. Juliet is central. Juliet carries weight. So the fact that she stepped into that part at such a young age showed that she already believed she belonged in serious performance. Around the same time, she was studying drama at American University. But even then, she did not seem built for waiting around and following a slow, ordinary path. That became clear when she made one of the first big decisions of her life. She dropped out of American University, not because she lacked talent or drive, but because she wanted to move faster. Instead of staying in school and waiting for the future to come to her, she opened her own ballet school and began teaching dance while she was still very young. She was around 19, and even that alone stands out. Most people at that age are still trying to figure themselves out. Goldie was already building work for herself. She was already acting like someone who trusted her own instincts more than the safe route laid out in front of her. That choice turned her from a student into a working performer, and it was an early sign of something important. She was not going to wait for permission. Still, building a life in performance was not glamorous at first. It was messy. It was uncertain. It meant chasing work wherever it appeared and taking whatever kept you in the game. In 1964, after leaving university, she was teaching dance, trying to stay active, and looking for the next opening. That same year, she made her professional dance debut in Can at the Texas Pavilion of the New York World's Fair, where crowds passed through every day. It was real work, visible work, and it kept her moving forward. Then, in 1965, she went even deeper into that hustle and worked as a go-go dancer in New York City and at the Peppermint Box in New Jersey. That part of her story matters because it strips away the fantasy. Before she became Goldie Hawn the star, she was simply Goldie trying to survive in show business any way she could. Then came the shift. In 1966, she moved to California, and that move started changing everything. From June to September that year, she joined the chorus of Pal Joey and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying at Melodyland Theater, across from Disneyland. She was still not the center of the story yet, but she was getting closer. She was in the room. She was being seen. She was building the kind of presence that makes people remember you, even before they know your name. Then, in 1967, a talent agent spotted her in a television chorus line, and that moment opened the next door. She was cast on Good Morning World for the 1967 to 1968 season, and suddenly she was no longer just dancing in the background. She was stepping into television. Even there, though, the path was not simple. She was often typed as the dumb blonde, which could have trapped someone else. But Goldie understood something important. What looked light on the surface could still be powerful if it was played the right way. She knew how to use charm. She knew how to use timing. She knew how to make people watch her without seeming to force it. So instead of being buried by that image, she turned it into the thing that made her stand out. That is exactly what happened in 1968, when she joined Rowan and Martin's Laugh In. This was not just another role. This was the moment that changed her life. The show was already one of America's biggest hits, and Goldie arrived right when its energy was strongest. Her bubbly, giggly, dumb blonde persona became one of the most memorable parts of the whole program. And soon, it was impossible to talk about Laugh In without thinking of her. But what made it work so well was that it was never random. The image looked carefree, but the performance underneath it was smart and controlled. She understood how innocence could grab attention. She understood how a nervous laugh, a silly line, or a bright expression could stay in people's minds. What looked easy was actually precise. And while the country was getting to know her through television, Hollywood was already moving. That is what makes this period so striking. Her rise did not crawl forward. It jumped. Before Laugh In, she had only small screen roles and a minor film appearance in The One and Only, Genuine Original Family Band in 1968. Then, Laugh In exploded, and almost immediately, film opportunities followed. From 1968 to 1970, she was in the exact window where television fame could turn into movie stardom, and she made that leap with shocking speed. The clearest example came with Cactus Flower in 1969. That film changed the way people saw her almost overnight. She was acting beside major names like Walter Matthau and Ingrid Bergman, which could easily have overshadowed a newer performer. But instead, audiences and critics kept locking onto Goldie. Her comic timing felt fresh. Her presence felt natural. She did not look like someone trying too hard to prove herself. She looked like she belonged there. That made a huge difference. Then came the real shock. In 1970, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for Cactus Flower, along with a Golden Globe for the same role. The jump was almost unbelievable. One moment, she was known mainly as a television comic. The next, she was an Oscar winner. And the story became even more memorable because she did not even attend the Academy Awards. She was in London filming and did not think she would win, so she skipped the ceremony and even missed the moment live. Raquel Welch accepted the Oscar for her, and Fred Astaire announced the win on stage. That detail makes the whole thing feel even stranger and more dramatic. Goldie Hawn became an Academy Award winner while she was somewhere else, not even expecting it. That sudden success changed her standing in Hollywood completely. The old idea that she was just a funny blonde from television could not survive after Cactus Flower. One strong film role wiped that label away and replaced it with something much bigger. After that, the doors opened fast. She moved into films like There's a Girl in My Soup in 1970, Eight in 1971, and Butterflies Are Free in 1972. And the pattern was clear. She was no longer a newcomer trying to be noticed. She was now a bankable star. What makes her movie rise even more interesting is how quickly it began. In The One and Only, genuine original family band, she met a very young Kurt Russell, who was only 16 at the time while she was 21. It meant nothing romantic then, but it became one of those strange little details that looks much more important in hindsight. At the time, though, the real story was that Goldie was moving from one level of fame to another at incredible speed. And then, years later, she did something even more important for her career. She stopped being only the star and started becoming the force behind the work itself. That shift became clear with Private Benjamin in 1980. Goldie did not just act in that film. She helped make it happen. Nancy Meyers created the idea for her. And when Warner Brothers hesitated, Goldie pushed back hard and made it clear she was willing to take the project elsewhere. The studio backed down, and she became executive producer. That mattered. In 1980, women producers were still rare in Hollywood, so this was not just a smart career move. It was a power move. Then, the gamble paid off. Private Benjamin opened on October 10, 1980, and it hit big right away. It made $4,139,169 in its first weekend, and eventually earned about $69.8 million worldwide against a budget of around $9.2 million. That alone would have made the story impressive, but the film did more than make money. It proved Goldie understood what audiences wanted and knew how to shape a project from the inside, not just carry it on screen. The movie also earned 3 Oscar nominations, including Best Actress for Goldie Hawn, Best Supporting Actress for Eileen Brennan, and Best Original Screenplay. So what looked on paper like a light comedy became a major career statement. That is really the thread running through all of this. Goldie Hawn's life did not move in a straight line, but every stage led into the next one with a strange kind of logic. The little girl raised in a house full of dance and music became the child performer who learned discipline early. That child performer became the teenager who wanted more than safe, local success. That teenager became the young woman who left university, built her own school, chased work, danced where she had to, and kept moving until somebody noticed. Then the dancer became a television personality. The television personality became a film star. The film star became an Oscar winner. And eventually, the actress became a woman with enough power to push a studio, produce a hit, and shape her own place in Hollywood. Goldie Hawn's story with love did not become complicated all at once. It happened in layers, and each layer left something behind. Her first marriage, her second marriage, the years of tension that followed, and then her long life with Kurt Russell all seem connected when you look at them closely. One chapter pushed her into the next. One heartbreak shaped the choice that came after it. Her first marriage was to Gus Trichinus. They married on May 16, 1969, in Honolulu, at the exact moment Goldie's career was rising fast. Rowan and Martin's Laugh In had already made her a familiar face, and then Cactus Flower brought her an Oscar in 1969. Everything in her public life was speeding up. Gus was not unknown. He had appeared in West Side Story and was trying to build his own directing career. But the problem was not that he had no career at all. The real problem was that Goldie's rise was much bigger and much faster, and that difference slowly turned into pressure inside the marriage. What made it worse was that success did not just change how the world saw Goldie. It also changed the balance at home. Reports later suggested that Goldie felt the gap between her soaring fame and Gus's weaker career momentum created a painful imbalance between them. That is where the marriage seems to have started breaking. It was not just a private relationship anymore. It was now carrying the weight of public success, wounded pride, and the hard truth that one life was moving much faster than the other. They separated on April 9, 1973, but even then, the story did not end cleanly. In fact, that is what made it harsher. The divorce dragged on until June 1976, which meant Goldie spent about 3 years stuck in a legal and emotional middle ground. She was no longer truly in the marriage, but she was not fully free of it either. That kind of delay can turn one ending into a long ache. Life keeps moving, work keeps growing, people keep watching, and yet the past still has your name tied to it. For someone becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars, that slow divorce likely made every rumor and every headline feel heavier. By late 1975, Goldie had already started moving on emotionally. She was even engaged to Bill Hudson before the divorce from Gus was finally over. That detail matters because it shows how tangled her life had become by then. Nothing ended in a neat line. One relationship was still legally alive, while another had already begun to take shape. So when people later wondered why Goldie seemed cautious about marriage, the answer may have started right here. Her first marriage did not simply fail. It lingered. It stayed in the room long after the love was gone. Then came Bill Hudson, and this second marriage moved fast. Goldie married him on July 3, 1976, almost immediately after her divorce from Gus was finalized in June of that year. The timing was intense from the start because she was already pregnant. Their son, Oliver Hudson, was born on September 7, 1976, and later their daughter, Kate Hudson, arrived on April 19, 1979. From the outside, this new chapter looked bright. It had youth, fame, music, children, and the look of a glamorous Hollywood family. But underneath that image, the cracks were already there. What made this marriage last in public memory is not only that it ended, it is the way both sides later seemed to describe two completely different marriages. Bill Hudson gave a much darker version of what happened between them. He claimed Goldie wanted an open marriage, while he wanted something more traditional and stable. According to his version, he tried to live with that difference until the relationship became too unequal and too painful. That claim changed the story in a major way. It stopped being just another celebrity breakup and became a fight over values, trust, freedom, and betrayal. Goldie, on the other hand, kept a very different public tone. She spoke more about moving forward, raising children, and building a life beyond the breakup. That contrast is part of why the story stayed alive for so long. It was not simply a marriage that failed. It became a case where two exes seemed to remember the same relationship in completely different ways. And when that happens, the public keeps returning to the story because people are not just looking at a breakup. They are trying to decide whose version feels more true. The legal ending came later. Bill Hudson filed for divorce on August 15, 1980, and the divorce was finalized in March 1982. Again, the split was not one clean moment. It stretched out. And by then, the real damage was bigger than the couple themselves. Oliver and Kate were still children, and the family break would later become part of their own public story, too. That is one reason this marriage still gets talked about decades later. It did not stay in the past. The pain carried forward through years of interviews, public comments, and family tension that never seemed to fully die. After that, Goldie did something very important. She did not rush back into another marriage. Instead, she focused on raising her children, and later she built a life with Kurt Russell without marrying him at all. That choice makes much more sense when you follow everything that came before it. Her first marriage taught her how long a bad ending can drag on. Her second marriage showed her how public and bitter a breakup can become. So, by the time Kurt Russell came fully into her life, Goldie was not chasing the usual idea of romance anymore. She was looking for something steadier, something safer. something that would not trap love inside a contract. That is why the next part of the story feels so important. Goldie and Kurt Russell first met in 1966 during a Disney project, when Kurt was still a teenager and Goldie was already in her early 20s. But nothing happened then. Their real story began much later in 1983, when they met again while working on Swing Shift. And by then, both of them had already lived enough to know what they did not want. Goldie had Oliver and Kate. Kurt had a son, Boston. This was not some carefree Hollywood romance between two people with nothing to lose. Both of them were already carrying families, histories, and scars from earlier relationships. The moment itself has become famous because it should have gone badly. Kurt showed up for the audition severely hungover and still threw out a bold pickup line. Under normal circumstances, that could have ruined everything. But somehow, it did the opposite. Goldie later said that Kurt stood out because he did not feel fake. He did not act polished in that empty Hollywood way, and he did not come across like a smooth womanizer. He felt real. And once she saw how he treated his son Boston, the whole thing deepened. That was the detail that mattered most to her, because by then, children came first. Not charm, not fame, not chemistry on its own. Family. Their romance began in 1983, and that is where the story takes a turn that still surprises people. After 2 failed marriages and years of public drama, Goldie finally found a relationship that lasted. But the longest and strongest relationship of her life became the one she never legalized. That is the part that makes everything connect. She had already seen what marriage could become when it went wrong. Kurt had been through divorce too. So instead of treating marriage like the final proof of love, they treated daily choice as the real proof. That idea showed up publicly in one of their most famous moments. At the 61st Academy Awards on March 29, 1989, Goldie and Kurt stood on stage together and joked in a way that made the whole room pause. Goldie called them co-stars, compadres, companions, and a couple. Kurt answered by saying there was only one thing they were not: married. Goldie immediately shot back, asking if that was a proposal. The audience laughed, but for a moment it felt real enough to make people wonder if they were about to announce an engagement live on television. Later, Kurt said the bit was their own idea. Even so, the reason it worked is clear. The joke touched the one question people had always asked them. And the truth is, even inside their own home, that question came up. About 10 years into their relationship, Goldie and Kurt asked their children whether they should get married. The answer was no. That small detail says a lot. In most celebrity stories, marriage is treated like the final happy ending. But their children did not want a wedding to complete the family. They already felt the family was complete. Goldie later said they already had love, loyalty, commitment, and a home. In other words, nothing important was missing. The legal paper would not create what they already had. Goldie became very direct about this in later years. In a 2023 interview, she asked a simple question: why should we get married? That was not a cold answer. It was an experienced one. She said, divorce can be painful, ugly, and expensive, especially when children are involved. That view did not come from theory. It came from living through it. She had seen how a marriage can end slowly, how public claims can reopen old wounds, and how the legal system can turn private heartbreak into a long and bitter process. So for her, not marrying Kurt was not a sign of fear or weakness. It was a decision shaped by memory. Kurt expressed the same spirit in his own way. One line often connected to him captures the whole feeling of their bond. Let's have fun until we don't. It sounds simple, but maybe that simplicity is exactly why it worked. Their relationship was built on wanting to stay, not having to stay. No pressure to prove anything. No legal structure pretending to guarantee permanence. Just two people choosing each other again and again over time. Meanwhile, the family itself kept growing. Goldie brought Oliver and Kate into the relationship. Kurt brought Boston. Then together they had Wyatt Russell, born in July 1986. So what they built was not just a romance. It was a blended family long before that phrase became trendy in celebrity culture. At the time, it was not presented like some social experiment. It simply became their life. And over the years, that life turned into one of Hollywood's longest-lasting family stories, all without a wedding. That is part of why their relationship stands out so much. It was not built in a straight line. They first met in 1966, but did not become a couple until 1983. That means the story had years of distance inside it before it ever became love. Then, once it began, it lasted across parenthood, fame, career changes, and decades of public attention. It was not quick. It was not neat. But maybe that is exactly why it lasted. It had already survived time before it even started. Goldie's later life also adds another layer to this story. After the Banger Sisters in 2002, she largely stepped away from regular acting. For a star of her size, that was a striking move. She did not drift away because people stopped knowing who she was. She was still Goldie Hawn, already an Oscar winner from Cactus Flower, still remembered for films like Shampoo, Private Benjamin, Death Becomes Her, and The First Wives Club. But after 2002, she mostly disappeared from the usual acting path. Then she returned in Snatched in 2017 and later appeared in The Christmas Chronicles 2 in 2020. That long break made many people wonder why she had walked away. But in later comments, she explained that many scripts simply did not feel right, and that good roles for women her age remained hard to find. That matters because it shows a pattern in her life. Again and again, Goldie seems to choose based on what feels honest to her, not based on what the world expects. She did not keep acting just because people thought she should. In the same way, she did not marry Kurt just because people thought that was the final step. Instead, she put energy into other work, especially Mind Up, the children's mental health and mindfulness nonprofit she founded more than 20 years ago. That shift says a lot about the later shape of her legacy. She did not just vanish. She moved her focus. She used her fame in a different way. And that also fits the deeper story of her life. After years of public romance, public marriage, public divorce, and public speculation, she seems to have cared more and more about peace, family, and purpose. So when people ask the big question, why did Goldie Hawn refuse to marry Kurt Russell? The answer is really much larger than one sentence. It is not just about romance. It is about everything that came before. She had already lived through a first marriage that broke under pressure and then dragged on for years. She had already lived through a second marriage that became tangled in accusations, bitterness, and long-lasting family scars. By the time she found the right partner in Kurt, she no longer needed marriage to feel secure. In fact, she may have trusted love more without it.